October 1805. The wind moves in long, low sighs across the channel. Mists roll like breath over the grey water, blurring the line between sea and sky. Somewhere beyond that horizon lies an empire waiting. Napoleon's Grande Armée, 200,000 men poised to strike across the narrow sea. On Britain's southern cliffs, the watchtowers burn through the fog with their signal lights, a nervous heartbeat pulsing through the darkness. The people of the British Isles hold their breath, uncertain whether dawn will bring invasion or deliverance. Across the ports and coastal towns, the fear is physical. Fishermen turn their boats inward, refusing to sail. In London, the newspapers speak in half whispers, their headlines trembling with rumour. The Emperor moves at Boulogne. Ministers pace the corridors of Whitehall, wondering whether the Channel Fleet can hold the line. For all the songs of empire and pride, Britain's fate hangs by a thread. Her army is small, scattered, and uncertain. Her fleet, her shield, is far from home, somewhere in the Atlantic, chasing shadows. In Portsmouth, soldiers march through rain-slick streets, volunteers and farmers dressed in red. Their boots splash through puddles, muskets heavy on their shoulders. They are the raw face of Britain's defense, young men with no memory of war, commanded by officers who pray they'll never see the enemy. Behind them walks a man few would notice, grey-haired, deliberate, his uniform plain, his stride steady. General Sir David Dundas. He is no hero in the romantic sense, no dashing figure for paintings or songs. Yet without him, the army standing on those cliffs might not exist at all. Just a year earlier, the British army was in disarray. The campaigns in Flanders had ended in humiliation. Regiments returned broken, discipline frayed. Officers drilled their men with private systems. No two battalions moved alike. In an age when Napoleon's soldiers could maneuver like clockwork, Britain's own army was a patchwork of confusion. It was Dundas who, in quiet obscurity, began to change that. A veteran of the old wars, he had spent his middle years studying the science of movement, the geometry of battle. He wrote manuals, translated Prussian tactics, and was mocked for caring more about foot placement than glory. Yet it was his obsession with order that would soon hold the country together. Now, as invasion looms, the fruits of his labor stand in grim silence. From Kent to Devon, red-coated regiments wait in tight formations, drilled, uniform, and ready to move. Their muskets glint in the pale light. The manuals Dundas once wrote in solitude now dictate every step, every turn, every volley. He has given Britain what it lacked most: coherence. He has turned fear into structure. Still, even he knows that training alone may not be enough. The French army across the Channel is vast, a living machine fueled by Napoleon's ambition. Each soldier is hardened by years of continental conquest. The British, by contrast, are untested, their courage unproven. And while Nelson's fleet hunts the enemy far to the south, the question no one dares to ask lingers in the cold air. What if the fleet fails? In Whitehall, maps stretch across oak tables. Ministers trace the coastline with shaking fingers, imagining where the first French boats might land. Dover, Brighton, Portsmouth. George III, aging and anxious, clings to reports of Nelson's movements like a prayer. Yet, for all their faith in the sea, the heart of Britain's survival may rest on the land, on the unglamorous efforts of men like Dundas, who rebuild quietly while others seek glory. As the fog thickens, a storm brews somewhere beyond the horizon. In a cramped cabin aboard HMS Victory, Admiral Nelson studies his charts by lamplight. He knows that the enemy fleet has left Cadiz, and he knows that this battle, if it comes, will decide more than naval supremacy. It will decide whether Britain remains free. But he cannot see the world that waits behind him. The soldiers, the anxious crowds, the quiet general holding the line in silence. For the people of Britain, the days pass in an anxious ritual. Church bells ring at dawn, prayers rise at night. In Dover, families peer through spyglasses toward France, imagining shapes in the mist. The Channel becomes a mirror of fear, a narrow space between two worlds, one free, one enslaved. On its far edge, the French camps at Boulogne are alive with drums and banners, their fires glowing red against the sea. Napoleon waits only for the signal, the moment the Royal Navy falters, to cross. And yet, beneath the dread, there is resilience. The people endure. Farmers offer their carts for the militia. Blacksmiths forge pikes. Women stitch regimental colors by candlelight. Britain has faced invasion before. The Armada, the Jacobites, and survived by the same stubborn faith that defines its soul. Dundas understands this better than most. He knows that victory is not just a matter of guns and ships. It is a matter of readiness, of spirit bound to discipline. As night falls again over the Channel, the watchfires burn brighter. On a hill outside Folkestone, Dundas stands with his aides, staring into the fog. The wind smells of salt and coal smoke. Somewhere out there, Nelson's fleet is closing in on destiny. Somewhere, a nation waits in breathless hope. The general says nothing. He knows his part is nearly done. To hold, to prepare, to be forgotten if victory comes. The sea murmurs in the dark, as if carrying the heartbeat of a nation. Within days, thunder will roll across the waves, and history will remember a single name. But behind that name stands another, silent, uncelebrated, the man who made Britain ready for the storm. The thunder of waves against the Dover cliffs feels heavier now, as if the sea itself carries warning. In the wake of Nelson's departure, Britain stands exposed. The newspapers call it the watchful calm, but few are fooled. Across the Channel, the greatest army in Europe gathers like a storm cloud waiting to break. The name whispered in every pub, in every person's prayer, is Napoleon. For years, his victories have redrawn the map of Europe. Now, his eyes turn north, toward the one island that still defies him. In the port city of Boulogne, the French camps stretch for miles. Rows of tents shimmer beneath the pale autumn light, the tricolour fluttering above a restless army of more than 150,000 men. Wooden boats, hundreds of them, line the beaches, barges built for one purpose, to carry the Grande Armée across the Channel. Artillery rumbles through the streets, drums beat with precision, and along the coast, French engineers construct massive flat-bottomed transports capable of ferrying horses and cannon. The air smells of tar, smoke, and destiny. For Napoleon, this is to be the invasion that will end Britain's resistance forever. From the cliffs of Kent, British lookouts can see the faint outline of Boulogne's fires on clear nights. The sight alone is enough to chill the soul. In London, Parliament is in turmoil. Debates stretch through the night, filled with anger, fear, and desperation. Some argue for negotiation, for peace at any cost. Others, the hardened few, insist that only courage will save them. Britain's army, they admit, is unfit for a continental war. Years of neglect, poor leadership, and lack of reform have left it brittle. When the Prime Minister asks how many men stand ready to defend the kingdom, the answer arrives with dreadful clarity. Too few. In those anxious months, General Sir David Dundas works without rest. From dawn to dusk, he inspects regiments, drills officers, rewrites orders, and imposes a uniform system across the army. Where confusion once reigned, he brings precision. His reforms, born of years of quiet study, now become the nation's last defense. The rules and regulations for the formations, field exercise, and movements of His Majesty's forces, his manual, becomes a soldier's Bible. For the first time, every regiment across Britain marches to the same beat, moves in the same pattern, fires by the same command. But outside the parade grounds, panic takes hold. Along the coasts of Sussex and Kent, thousands of civilians dig trenches, erect barricades, and gather stones to block the roads against French landing parties. Church bells are fitted with ropes to signal invasion. In small towns, militia companies drill in churchyards, bakers, cobblers, and schoolteachers, clutching muskets older than themselves. The atmosphere is one of feverish preparation mixed with dread. No one knows when or where the blow will fall. Inside Whitehall, the tension is unbearable. The British government establishes a network of signal stations along the coast, each equipped with tall semaphore masts capable of flashing coded messages across miles of open air. The slightest movement of the French fleet will be seen and reported within minutes. Britain has turned its very landscape into a nervous system, its cliffs, valleys, and hills transformed into watchful sentinels. It is an act of genius and fear combined, and yet, amid the chaos, Dundas remains calm. He believes that order is a nation's true weapon. Discipline, he writes in a letter to a colleague, is the soul of resistance. He is not loved for it. Many officers, especially the aristocratic ones, resent his rigidity and his insistence that science, not lineage, should define command. But Dundas is unmoved. He knows that if Napoleon lands, there will be no time for improvisation. Only a well-drilled army, united in motion and thought, can stand against the greatest general of the age. Across the Channel, Napoleon's preparations take on the air of divine certainty. He has personally inspected every port, every ship, every gun. His invasion flotilla, though fragile, is massive, a wooden bridge waiting for the right wind. He plans to cross in a single night, under cover of darkness, to land near Deal or Dover. In secret, his engineers even experiment with floating caissons and portable harbors. To the French soldiers, the invasion feels inevitable. To the British, it feels imminent. But fate is a tide that turns unseen. As Dundas trains his regiments on English soil, nature itself conspires against the Emperor. The weather shifts, the winds refuse to change, and the Royal Navy's watch along the French coast tightens like a noose. Still, no one in Britain dares to relax. In Portsmouth, mothers keep candles burning at their windows. In London, whispers of betrayal circulate, fears that spies and sympathizers lurk within. By September, the army that Dundas has built is no longer the broken force of years past. Lines of red march in step across Salisbury Plain, muskets gleaming, drums rolling with mechanical precision. Observers speak of a transformation, an army reborn in the shadow of annihilation. It is not glamorous work, and Dundas will never be celebrated for it. But, in the quiet of his mind, he understands that history often forgets those who prevent disaster. As autumn deepens, the Channel grows rough and unpredictable. Napoleon begins to turn his gaze elsewhere, toward Austria, toward destiny on land. But in Britain, no one yet knows that the invasion is faltering. The signal stations remain alert, the militias restless, the army ever drilling. Fear remains the one constant, the shadow that binds the nation. And through it all, Dundas continues his march, unseen, unthanked, but unyielding. His reforms, his discipline, and his quiet faith in structure will soon be tested in ways even he cannot imagine. The storm that has gathered for years is about to break, not upon the shores of England, but upon the waves themselves. The next chapter of Britain's survival will be written not on land, but at sea, where a one-eyed admiral is already sailing toward immortality. The wind that once carried fear now carries the rhythm of drums. Across the fields of southern England, the red lines of Britain's army march in slow, deliberate unison, boots striking mud, muskets glinting beneath the slate-gray sky. The invasion has not come, yet the tension lingers in every ordered step. And at the center of this transformation stands a man who never sought glory, Sir David Dundas, the soldier's general. He is not the figure of legend that fills the paintings of Britain's later wars. There are no portraits of him galloping through cannon smoke or standing heroic upon a ridge. Dundas is an architect of discipline, a man of method and patience, whose genius lies not in the fury of battle, but in the stillness before it. His legacy is written not in blood, but in order. Years before the spectre of Napoleon darkened Europe, Dundas had already begun the work that would one day save his country. After a lifetime of service, from the 7 Years' War to the Low Countries, he returned to Britain with a conviction few shared: that victory was not born of courage alone. It required geometry, logic, and unity of motion. He studied the armies of Prussia and Austria, dissecting their efficiency, and from his study emerged something revolutionary for its time: a vision of an army that thought and moved as one. In 1792, he published his Principles of Military Movements, a dry title that hid its significance. Within its pages, Dundas proposed a unified system of drill and maneuver, a language of movement that any regiment could understand. It was not glamorous work, and at first, it earned him ridicule. Officers called him Old Pivot, mocking his obsession with wheelings and formations, the way he spoke of troops as if they were parts of a living machine. But Dundas endured the laughter. He knew that behind the sneer of the gentleman officer lay the danger of disunity. When the threat of invasion began to darken the Channel, his moment arrived. Britain's army, once fragmented, had to become a single instrument. And Dundas, methodical and unflinching, was ready. He imposed his system across every regiment, from the veterans of the Guards to the untested county militias. His manual became doctrine, and his name, once mocked, was now stamped on every drill order in the kingdom. The transformation was not easy. In the cold mornings on Salisbury Plain, Dundas would ride along the ranks as the mist clung to the grass. His eyes missed nothing: a soldier out of step, a sergeant's hesitation, a company turning too wide on the pivot. He corrected not with fury, but with precision. He demanded not fear, but fluency. The soldiers grew to respect him for it. To them, Dundas was not a distant strategist, but a presence, the man who asked them to master their craft as if it were a sacred duty. There is something deeply British in his quiet reform. While others chased fame and flamboyance, Dundas worked in silence. He believed that heroism was hollow without competence, that courage meant little if it fell into chaos. And so, he trained an army not merely to fight, but to think, to hold its line when all seemed lost. In the barracks, his influence spread like a discipline of the mind. Gone were the improvisations of officers who had learned war by habit. Now came precision, measured volleys, seamless formations, the unity of movement that would later define Wellington's army. Each man became a part of a larger design, and in that design, they found purpose. The camera of history rarely lingers on such work. It prefers the charge, the smoke, the glory. But if one listens carefully, beneath the echoes of cannon and the shouts of admirals, there is another sound, the steady, measured beat of Dundas's army. Practicing in the rain, he was, in many ways, a lonely figure. A man of conviction in an age of charisma. In private letters, he lamented the vanity of younger officers, their hunger for medals over mastery. He spoke of war not as adventure, but as mathematics and endurance. His devotion to the system made him a target of satire, yet it also made him indispensable. When Britain's survival depended on readiness, it was Dundas's doctrine that made readiness possible. As the months passed, that doctrine began to ripple outward. British officers stationed in the colonies adopted his methods. Foreign observers wrote of the newfound cohesion of British troops. The army, once scorned as a relic beside Napoleon's modern machine, began to look different, sharper, faster, alive with confidence. Dundas had done what no battle could. He had given Britain the discipline of survival, and yet he remained in the shadows. When praise came, it went to others, to ministers, to admirals, to generals of more flamboyant reputation. Dundas seemed content with that. He knew his work was not for monuments, but for endurance. "Let the army stand," he is recorded to have said, "and I am satisfied." By the end of 1805, the army he had reshaped stood vigilant across Britain's coasts and fields. It was no longer the fractured, undisciplined force of years past. It was a weapon ready to be wielded. The invasion might still come, or it might never arrive. Either way, Dundas had done what he believed was his duty, to ensure that when the test came, Britain would not break from within. And while the waves still pounded against the southern cliffs, and the nation turned its gaze toward the sea, where Nelson sought his destiny, another kind of victory had already been won, one of order over fear, of method over chaos. For every hero who dies in battle, there is another who ensures the army survives to fight. Dundas would never stand beneath a triumphal arch or rest in a hero's tomb. His triumph was quieter, the slow transformation of a people learning that preparation itself can be a form of courage. As the sound of marching feet fades into the winter wind, the camera turns once more to the horizon, to the ships gathering beyond sight. For the storm that will define an age is now only days away. The wind has shifted. The Channel, once shrouded in mist, now carries the deep, rolling breath of the Atlantic. As Sir David Dundas drills his regiments on British soil, another war, the Greater War, unfolds upon the waves. The threat of invasion is no longer abstract. It rides the decks of ships bearing the tricolour of France and the crimson and gold ensign of Spain. And against that tide stands one man, a frail, one-eyed admiral with a voice of iron and a heart that beats for England, Horatio Nelson. Nelson's name had already become legend. The victories at the Nile and Copenhagen had made him the face of British defiance. But now, in the autumn of 1805, the stakes are far greater. If the French and Spanish fleets unite and seize control of the Channel, Napoleon's army will sail. Every regiment Dundas has trained, every cliff-top fort and signal mast will be tested within days. The line between survival and conquest lies not in the fields of Kent, but upon the restless sea. The Admiral's pursuit of the enemy has been long and merciless. For months, he has chased Admiral Villeneuve, Napoleon's reluctant naval commander, across the Atlantic and back, from the Caribbean to the coast of Spain. It is a chase of strategy, endurance, and nerves, waged through storm and sickness. In the small hours, Nelson writes to the woman he calls "My dear Emma," confessing exhaustion, but also resolve. "I cannot rest," he writes, "while my country is in danger." By early October, the trap begins to close. Off the port of Cadiz, the combined French and Spanish fleets lie at anchor. 33 ships of the line, their decks crowded with soldiers meant for the invasion of England. Inside those ships lies the hope of an empire that dreams of crushing Britain once and for all. But the longer they wait, the more the wind and uncertainty erode their resolve. Napoleon's orders are impatient. Villeneuve's courage, already shaken by defeat and illness, begins to waver. Far to the north, Dundas receives word through dispatches that Nelson has taken command of the fleet. He knows what that means. For all his focus on drills and formations, Dundas understands the balance of Britain's war rests upon a single truth. If the navy falls, the army will fight and die on its own soil. The soldiers he has trained march each morning beneath a sky that might soon be filled with enemy sails. Every musket fired in practice echoes the distant thunder of cannon at sea. Meanwhile, in Portsmouth, shipwrights work day and night. The scent of tar, pitch, and oak fills the air. Women sew flags. Children gather driftwood to fuel the fires of the forges. The entire nation seems to tilt toward the horizon, waiting. Britain has become an island of preparation. Its people, its soldiers, and its sailors bound by one invisible line of defense: discipline. Dundas's order on land, Nelson's precision at sea, both are expressions of the same national instinct to endure. Out at sea, Nelson gathers his captains aboard HMS Victory for what will be his final council of war. They stand beneath the lanterns in the great cabin. The smell of oil and salt thick in the air. Nelson speaks plainly. No flourishes, no grand orations. His plan is audacious: to break the enemy line in two, to bring the battle to close quarters where British gunnery and courage will decide the day. He knows it will cost lives, perhaps his own. Yet he is calm. His men have seen the confidence in his eyes before, and it steadies them. Back in England, Dundas oversees a field exercise on Salisbury Plain. As he watches the red lines wheel and fire in perfect rhythm, he allows himself a rare thought. These men are ready. The army no longer stumbles. It breathes with purpose. He does not know it, but his unseen hand in the nation's defense, the order he has built from fear, has freed Nelson to take his gamble. Without a secure homeland, Nelson's fleet could not have ventured so boldly. Without Dundas's soldiers, Britain could not risk its navy far from home. On 19th of October, Villeneuve finally ordered his ships to sea. The masts of the combined fleet rise like a forest of ghosts against the dawn. The people of Cadiz line the harbor walls, praying as the thunder of chains and drums marks the fleet's departure. Out beyond the bay, Nelson's ships wait, sails trimmed, guns loaded, crews silent at their posts. The sea between them shivers with history's anticipation. In the coming hours, two empires will meet on the water, and the outcome will decide the fate of Europe. Nelson's ships are outnumbered, his formation unconventional, his position uncertain. Yet his courage, like Dundas's discipline, rests on something deeper than numbers. An unshakable faith in preparation, in the character of his men, in the idea that Britain, though small, will never kneel. As the evening light fades over the English coast, signal flags flutter from the high masts at Dover. Messages flash through the semaphore lines. The enemy has sailed. Dundas receives the news in silence. For a long moment, he stands by the window, the rain tapping against the glass, listening to the distant thunder that may already be the guns of Trafalgar. He says nothing. His work is done. The rest lies with the sea. At dawn, the channel appears strangely calm, its surface silver beneath a pale sky. No invasion barges appear on the horizon. No French banners flutter. Yet far beyond sight, off Cape Trafalgar, destiny is gathering speed. Wood, wind, and fire, about to decide the future of Britain. The next day will bring death, triumph, and legend. But for now, on this quiet shore, Britain waits, united in fear, in discipline, and in the fragile, indomitable hope that the gamble will succeed. The dawn broke cold and colorless. The wind that swept across the channel carried no scent of battle, only the quiet weight of expectation. From the southern cliffs to the narrow streets of London, Britain awoke into a day of waiting, the day on which its fate would be decided far beyond sight. It was the morning of the Battle of Trafalgar, though no one yet called it that. To most, it was simply the day Britain held its breath. Along the white cliffs of Dover, Sir David Dundas rode out before his regiments. The air was damp, the sky bruised with clouds that hung low over the sea. Thousands of soldiers, Regulars, militia, and volunteers stood in silent formation, watching the horizon. Their boots sank into the wet chalk soil, muskets glimmering beneath the dim light. They did not know what was happening hundreds of miles away off the coast of Spain, only that this was the moment for which they had trained. The order Dundas had instilled in them was their only comfort against uncertainty. Further inland, across the southern counties, bells rang in churches, not in celebration, but as signals of readiness. Militia captains readied dispatch riders, their horses steaming in the cold air. In Portsmouth, women lined the harbour walls, staring out to the open water, their shawls pulled tight against the wind. Somewhere beyond that horizon, their husbands, sons, and fathers were engaged in a battle they could not see but could almost feel. A battle whose echoes seemed to tremble in the air itself. In London, the atmosphere was feverish. Rumours raced through taverns and coffee houses. The fleets have met. The French have landed. Nelson has been wounded. None of it was confirmed, but all of it was believed. Crowds gathered near the Admiralty, staring at the empty flagpole where no signals yet flew. A sense of suspended time hung over the capital. Every breath, every word, every heartbeat belonging to the sea. Meanwhile, off Cape Trafalgar, reality burned with a ferocity that words could barely contain. Nelson's ships had found the enemy. The French and Spanish fleets stretched across the horizon in a vast uneven crescent, 33 ships to Britain's 27. The wind was light, the sea long and rolling, and the morning sun turned the water to silver. From the quarterdeck of HMS Victory, Nelson gazed through his spyglass at the enemy line. Around him, his officers stood silent, knowing that once the signal was given, there would be no turning back. At 11:45, the great flag unfurled from Victory's mizzenmast. England expects that every man will do his duty. The signal ran through the fleet like electricity. And far to the north, though unseen, it might as well have reached the soldiers on Dover's cliffs. In both places, the same truth pulsed beneath the surface, that Britain, for all its pride and rhetoric, was fighting for its survival. In the Channel, Dundas's men drilled once more. The rhythm of their muskets echoed faintly against the wind. To them, the sound was mechanical, but to those listening, it felt almost symbolic. The beat of a nation holding formation, even as chaos raged beyond reach. Dundas knew that if Nelson failed, his army would face an invasion of terrifying scale. Every regiment he had built, every manual he had written, was now part of the invisible scaffolding that allowed Nelson to fight freely at sea. The battle itself unfolded like a storm given human shape. Nelson's two columns, one led by Victory, the other by Collingwood's Royal Sovereign, cut directly into the enemy line, ignoring convention and caution alike. Cannon roared, masts shattered. Men were thrown to the decks as splinters turned the air into knives. For hours, the sea was a chaos of smoke and thunder, fire and faith. Yet through it all, Nelson's signal still flew, the words rippling above the carnage like a prayer. Back in Britain, the uncertainty became unbearable. By mid-afternoon, messengers galloped between coastal stations. No news yet from the fleet. The semaphore towers stood still, their arms unmoving against the graying sky. Families lit candles in their windows, not knowing whether they would burn for victory or mourning. In taverns, silence replaced laughter. Every man and woman seemed to sense that something vast and irreversible was happening beyond their reach. On the cliffs, Dundas watched the Channel as the wind rose. The soldiers' coats snapped in the gusts. The flags strained against their poles. He said little, only that the men should hold their posts. There was no panic, no grand speech, only steadiness. It was as if the entire army had absorbed its general's temperament. Quiet, prepared, unyielding. Each man stood ready for a battle that might never arrive, but whose possibility defined them. As dusk descended on the English coast, the first reports began to flicker through the semaphore network. Vague, broken messages. Enemy engaged. British line advancing. Heavy losses. Admiral wounded. The news reached London by midnight, carried by exhausted riders whose horses stumbled into the city's lamplit streets. Crowds pressed against the gates of the Admiralty, desperate for clarity. When the truth finally came, that Nelson had destroyed the enemy fleet but fallen in the moment of triumph, Britain wept and rejoiced in the same breath. Yet on the windswept cliffs, Dundas's regiments stood their ground long after darkness fell. They did not cheer, nor did they mourn. They simply waited, disciplined and silent, until word reached them the next morning. When it did, their cheers rolled across the downs like cannon fire, not only for Nelson's victory, but for the knowledge that the invasion would never come. 2 battles had been fought that day, one in the roaring surf of Trafalgar, the other in the stillness of readiness. Nelson had won his glory in a blaze of heroism. Dundas had secured his legacy in the quiet courage of endurance. As the smoke cleared from the sea and the wind shifted once more toward England, a new chapter of British destiny began. The nation was safe, but the men who saved it, one through brilliance, the other through discipline, would soon take very different paths into memory. The storm has passed. The guns have fallen silent, and the Channel lies calm once more. In the harbours of Portsmouth and Plymouth, bells ring through the mist, not in alarm this time, but in triumph. Britain has been spared. The French fleet is shattered, the invasion dream dissolved, and Admiral Horatio Nelson is dead. The man who embodied the courage of a nation has given his life in the moment of victory, and the people of Britain, from the dockyards to the drawing rooms, mourn and celebrate as one. In London, black crape drapes the windows of shops and taverns. Newspapers arrive damp with ink and tears, their headlines colossal. Victory at Trafalgar. Nelson falls in glory. The city becomes a living monument. Men stand bareheaded in the rain as church bells toll for the fallen admiral. Women weep in silence, holding portraits of the man whose courage they had never seen but whose spirit they felt. Across Britain, victory has the taste of grief. Yet beyond the reach of public mourning, away from the crowds and the cathedrals, there is another figure, alive, steadfast, and quietly forgotten. Sir David Dundas, now nearing the twilight of his career, watches the celebrations from the edges of history. His regiments, drilled to perfection, never fired a shot in anger. His soldiers, once ready to repel the invasion, now return to their garrisons or their homes. Britain's salvation has come not through the army's endurance, but through the navy's triumph. And so the nation remembers the man who died at sea, not the one who stood waiting on the cliffs. For Dundas, there are no parades, no state funerals, no monuments rising from stone. His work had been preventive, invisible by design. He did not win the war, but he ensured that when the war came, Britain was ready. In the logic of history, that is often the quieter victory, and the first to fade. Yet his fingerprints are everywhere. In the precision of the marching ranks, in the discipline of the barracks, in the manuals that officers still carry beneath their cloaks. The rules and regulations he wrote have become scripture. In the months that follow Trafalgar, Britain begins to breathe again. The threat of invasion has lifted. Napoleon, thwarted at sea, turns his fury eastward. The island's armies are no longer needed for home defense, but are dispatched abroad, to Portugal, to Spain, to the long, grinding wars that will culminate at Waterloo. There, a new name will arise, Arthur Wellesley, the Duke of Wellington, commanding an army that moves and fights with the precision Dundas envisioned. The discipline of those men, their unwavering cohesion in the face of French assault, will bear the mark of the forgotten general who taught them how to stand. But in 1805, as the nation drowns in gratitude for Nelson, Dundas fades quietly from public life. Within military circles, he remains respected but rarely loved. His insistence on structure and conformity has made him indispensable yet unpopular, the sort of man whose success is only visible in crisis. Even among officers, his name becomes shorthand for rigidity. Dundas's drill. They say it with equal parts reverence and irritation. They forget that those very drills forge the backbone of an army that will outlast empires. At Horse Guards, new men rise through the ranks, younger, ambitious, hungry for adventure. Dundas, ever the scholar, continues to refine his systems, issuing revisions, clarifying commands, ensuring that the rhythm of discipline will endure after he is gone. He writes with the patience of a man who knows that history rarely thanks its engineers. To some he seems obsessive, to others, prophetic. Meanwhile, Nelson's funeral consumes the nation. His body, preserved in brandy, is carried in solemn procession through London. Tens of thousands line the streets as cannon thunder from the tower, and St. Paul's bells toll above the river. The poet laureates speak of Britannia's immortal son. Dundas attends in silence. He stands among the uniforms and banners, his weathered face expressionless. When the coffin passes, draped in the Union flag, he bows his head, not in envy, but in understanding. He knows that the legend of Nelson will carry the burden of national memory, and that his own contribution, like so many others, will sink beneath it. But legacy does not need applause to endure. In the years that follow, as the wars stretch across Europe, the reforms Dundas put in motion prove their worth. His manuals guide Wellington's lieutenants through the Peninsular War. His insistence on standardized training turns raw recruits into soldiers capable of standing against Napoleon's veterans. Even the famed Thin Red Line at Balaclava, decades later, will echo his teachings, a formation as philosophical as tactical. Dundas's influence, though unseen, becomes the architecture of British military identity. And yet, for all his achievements, he dies with little fanfare. There is no grand eulogy, no marble monument. His grave is modest, marked by a simple inscription. Time moves on, and the world that once depended on his discipline forgets the man who gave it form. His manuals gather dust in regimental libraries. His name slips quietly from the conversation of history. But if one were to listen closely, to the tramp of British soldiers across Europe, to the steady volley of muskets at Waterloo, to the parade ground rhythm that still echoes in the modern army, one might hear him there, whispering through the centuries, the voice of order, of reason, of preparation. For every hero who dies in light, there is another who keeps the darkness from falling. Sir David Dundas was such a man. He saved Britain not through glory, but through readiness. And readiness, though unseen, is the foundation of survival. The echoes of Trafalgar and Waterloo have long faded into legend. Decades have passed since Britain's greatest battles reshaped the fate of Europe, and the Empire now strides across continents, confident, industrious, certain of its destiny. Yet in the calm after so many storms, history begins its quiet revision. It remembers the heroes who died in glory, the victories carved in marble, and the flags that fluttered above the smoke. But beneath those symbols lies another kind of legacy. Invisible, methodical, and enduring. The legacy of Sir David Dundas, the man who built the foundation on which those triumphs stood. In the military academies of the mid-19th century, young officers study tactics with a new reverence for system and science. They quote the Duke of Wellington, who once said that the success of the British Army lay in its discipline, in the steadiness of the line, and the obedience of the man. Few realize that those words echo the doctrines of Dundas, written in neat mathematical prose decades earlier. His rules and regulations, once derided as pedantry, have become the skeleton of modern command. The drills that once seemed tedious now define an army envied across Europe. Historians of the New Age begin to trace this transformation backwards. They see how Britain, once disorganized and complacent, had found unity through order, not through inspiration, but through structure. And in their search for the origin of that order, they find Dundas, the forgotten architect, the man whose obsession with precision had quietly birthed a military revolution. By then, his grave had weathered, its inscription softened by rain. Few visit it. The public remembers Nelson's immortal resting place beneath St. Paul's Dome, the grandeur of Wellington's funeral procession through the capital. Dundas lies far from such splendor. No parades, no statues, no hymns echoing through cathedrals. Yet his influence lives in every drill square, every officer's handbook, every parade where redcoats move in perfect unison. His ghost inhabits the rhythm of British arms. In the candlelit halls of Sandhurst, instructors still cite his methods, often without realizing it. The sequence of commands, the geometry of formations, the clarity of signals, all trace their lineage to the mind of a man who believed that chaos was the greatest enemy of courage. To Dundas, war was not just a contest of bravery, but of organization, the ability to turn fear into function. His was a philosophy of control in an age of emotion, a reminder that the strength of a nation lies not only in its daring, but in its discipline as the century progresses. The Empire fights new wars, in India, in Crimea, across Africa. In each, the spirit of Dundas's teaching reveals itself in the unflinching order of British ranks. Even when innovation overtakes musket and line, his principles remain embedded in the nation's military mind. Clarity of movement, unity of purpose, obedience to reason. What he had built was more than a manual. It was a mindset, a culture of steadiness that would outlast empires. And yet, history's memory is fickle. Nations prefer their martyrs to their administrators, their heroes to their craftsmen. Nelson's name still burns bright in poetry and song. Wellington's shadow looms over state and statue alike. Dundas, who saved Britain from disarray before a single shot was fired, vanishes into the footnotes of their glory. His portrait, once hung in military offices, is replaced by others. His reforms become assumed truths, invisible precisely because they succeeded. But history, when written honestly, cannot ignore the architecture of endurance. In dusty archives, historians rediscover his works and begin to grasp their scope. They see how his insistence on standardization gave Britain an advantage that transcended any single battle. The army he reformed did not just fight Napoleon, it defined the professional identity of the British soldier for a century. His life becomes a parable of quiet greatness. The idea that some victories are measured not in blood, but in prevention. In retrospect, his story feels quintessentially British. Reserved, dutiful, and uncelebrated, a life spent in service, not spectacle. He embodied the virtue that underpins so much of Britain's endurance. The belief that true strength lies in doing one's duty well, even when no one is watching. Dundas never sought fame. He sought readiness, and in that readiness, he safeguarded a nation. If Nelson gave Britain her moment of triumph, Dundas gave her the capacity to survive it. He was the man who ensured that when crisis came, chaos did not reign. His reforms turned fear into function, disorder into discipline, and vulnerability into resilience. He proved that the greatest victories often begin long before the battle. In the unseen labor of those who prepare others to act, the years will continue to pass, and his name may never be etched into the nation's consciousness alongside those of its legends. But the spirit of his work endures wherever discipline meets courage, in every soldier who holds the line, in every commander who trusts his men to stand firm. Because victory, as Dundas knew, is not only won in battle, it is won in preparation, in the quiet conviction that order, patience, and resolve are the truest weapons a nation can wield.